Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the breakout session with Free Now for Business. I'm happy to welcome Fabio Griemens, who will be the presenter for this breakout session. Fabio is Director Strategy and Operations at Free Now for Business. Fabio, a big welcome to you, and already also a thank you for your contribution and your support as a partner to the first Smart Mobility Conference. The title of your session will be Mobility Budget, Fantasy or Reality. So looking forward myself as well to discover that. To all the participants, please do feel free to ask your questions to Fabio during the session in the chat box on the right-hand side or the Q&A box on the right-hand side. We will try to respond upon these questions if time allows it at the end of the session. Fabio, I will now leave the floor to you, and I will join again 5 minutes prior to the end of the 30-minute slot. Should you have finished earlier, then of course I will join you. But then at least when I will join you 5 minutes prior to the end, you will know that you only have 5 more minutes. If there's something is, let's say, going wrong during the presentation, I will also come in again and address the possible issue. Fabio, all the best. The floor is yours, and looking forward to your presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Yeah, thanks for the intro. Happy to be here. I already mentioned to David, I'm sitting in our new headquarters in Hamburg, in the middle of the harbor. So if you see a ship coming by, it's not a virtual reality, it's actual reality, which I'm looking forward to coming back to. It's my second time here with the SMI, and I'll speak a little bit slow in the beginning because I realized that people are still moving over from the main stage over here into our little session. And today's focus will be, as David said, on the mobility budget. Is it fantasy? Is it reality? We've talked a lot about it also today, a lot of buzzwords flying around. And when we say mobility budget, we mean employer subsidized private travel. And this private travel is obviously something that we're looking forward to getting back to. But in regards to corporate mobility and mobility budget, we need to understand what are actually the needs of the employee, what are the needs of the employer, how do we make sure that both of these needs actually fit together. And the question that we asked ourselves, if so many employees are actually wanting mobility budget and so many employers, like we hear in today's conference, actually interested in investing into it, what's the holdup? Why don't we have much more people investing, much more suppliers providing this? And yeah, that's what we want to focus on today. As I mentioned, my name is Fabio Griemens. I'm heading up the strategy and operations team at Free Now for Business. So part of my job is looking into the future and understanding where business travel is going. And the other part of me is trying to make sure that together with my teams, I'm finding ways, business models, operations to set up the local teams for success. Let's start with the employees' mobility challenges. And I think all of you can relate, at least I personally can relate to these challenges. Do I need a car? If yes, should I avail of the company car program if my employer provides me one? I've worked in consultancy before with EY, and I deliberately decided against a company car. And reason being, where should I park in the city? What about the traffic? Do I really want to care about, maintenance and repairs? The answer was no. And I realized in that moment that, back in the days when owning a car and driving around in a fancy car was more of like a prestige, now it's more about getting the ease of mind and finding, flexible ways, as we heard earlier, to get from A to B. The second topic is about public transport, monthly public transport tickets, and how do we make sure that we actually commute to work in a more flexible manner. Before Corona, nobody, not many companies looked into flexible work options. Now we have hybrid options. I'm now in the office for the first time in months. After Corona, I could probably see myself coming back to the office 2 days a week, Maybe a week I'll come the entire so every day. Maybe there's a week I'm not going to join my colleagues in the office at all. So we need to make sure that commuting is getting more flexible, and this is something that is obviously on a lot of employees' minds at the moment. The third one is around environment. How do I bring down my personal carbon footprint? For those of you who read Bill Gates' last book on how to avoid a climate disaster, he talks about this 51 number. 51 billion tons of CO2 are being emitted every single year. And mobility is actually contributing roundabout to 1/5 of that. So how do we clean that up? It's not really, in my opinion, about traveling less. It's rather being about traveling smart and making sure that we move more responsibly for work as well as for private purposes. And then lastly, and it's actually my favorite one, is the user experience. In my opinion, getting from A to B is oftentimes pretty much of a nightmare. I just checked 2 days ago and I realized I have 21 travel apps on my phone, 9 of which are geared towards ground transportation. It's ineffective, it's inefficient, and as I said, terrible user experience. So this is something that we need to get a grip around if you really want to make employees happy. Then there is the side of the company, right? So listening to our customers, we know that the needs for the employer and the travel managers and the procurement managers are a little bit different to what the employees actually need. On your side, and you, the audience, anticipating that many of you are rather interested in streamlining processes, simple payment, expensing, making sure our employees are safe, and are basically the key criteria when looking into mobility options. The second one is about, as we heard a lot today, company car and fleet efficiency. Many of the customers we're talking to are having the same issue. How do we make sure that we either decrease the cost or increase the efficiency with regards to our fleet? 96% of the time, the fleet that we have or that our employees are using is just standing still on the side of the street. And as we said, after Corona, we need to be more flexible. We need to offer more flexibility to our to our employees, and making sure that fleet is used in the most efficient way. The third one is the same as on the employee side. So CSR, it's expected by society that companies are putting more effort into sustainable solutions. So suppliers need to make sure that they actually, check all the boxes when it comes to providing sustainable way of mobility. And the last one, it's one of my favorites. It's about employer branding. We are in a world where the war for talent is as high as it has never been before. So you are competing with other companies on a more global scale since Corona. And we need to all find arguments for great talent to join our companies, right? To bring our teams to the next level. And employer benefits, everything besides salary, is something that we need to talk more about. And I'm happy to hear that mobility is being considered as a way to provide benefits to our employees going forward. In a GBTA poll, we learned that over 50% of travel managers actually say that their company has changed its travel policies towards ground transportation as a result of Corona. So in a nutshell, Corona has accelerated a lot of these changes, and it's leading us as suppliers to find more flexible mobility solutions. And there's another quote I found from Stephen from last year's Smart Mobility Institute event. And he said that employees have new expectations around work-life balance, wellness, health, and benefits such as mobility. So in my opinion, companies that find the right answers, right, to these expectations are best prepared to attract and retain talent for which a sustainable, smart, and employee-centric mobility plan has become more or less like a key ingredient to what we call the fringe benefits. And I'll talk more about tax later, so stay tuned. So the dream solution basically looks like this. Employees want to have one app with many mobility options on it. They want to have the flexibility to get from A to B however they want to, and they expect more perks, so benefits from the employers in addition to the typical salary. And the employers, the companies, they are expecting a slick process, a nice setup, in addition to an easy way of payment, easy way of expensing, streamlining all the data, and doing that in a safe, green, and compliant mobility manner. So the question is, how do we bring these two worlds now together. There are currently more or less 3 different approaches to this, 3 different buckets. The first bucket is around mobility allowance, mobility budget. So basically having one app that an employee can use to travel anywhere he or she wants to, and make sure that we hit a certain allowance amount that was provided by the employer. There are not many apps out there currently who are able to offer a multi-mobility setup on this one app. So that's why we have the second bucket, the payment solution bucket, basically saying, use any app that you wish, right? Book a public transport on this app, on an e-scooter on that app, and car sharing with that app. As long as you pay with this payment method that is geared towards all mobility options, it's easy for the employer then to streamline everything in the back end and do salary and tax processes on the back of that. That means you would still need to entertain 21 different mobility apps, but still, besides the user experience, it's definitely something worthwhile pursuing from a company perspective. And the third bucket is basically saying, use any app you want, use any payment options you want, as long as you upload your expense, your statement, your invoice in a certain system, then again, the employer can streamline all of this data in the backend. So there are more solutions out there, I know, but these are the 3 buckets I feel are easiest to understand how corporates are currently looking into solving the mobility budget topic. And this here is an excerpt from the Smart Mobility poll that was going on today. And it's actually great to see that many of you are already integrating multi-mobility options into your mobility strategy. So while few of you are already having a mobility budget, and you can see that here on this purple chart on the left-hand side, almost half of you on the right-hand side are planning on implementing it over the next 3 years. So it seems like this buzzword mobility budget is gaining some traction. And the question is, how do we make sure that we actually solve this need? Before we get to that, the question is, what has taken so long? What is the holdup? What are the barriers of that suppliers, customers, and governments actually create that leads to no proper solution, kind of overtaking the entire market? The first holdup, in my opinion, is the multi-mobility fragmentation. So 50% of travelers actually have the same issue that I have, namely they use more than 4 travel apps on their phone. We have lots of regulations, a different startup landscape, and a very operationally heavy business and complexity to make sure that we, for example, bring e-scooters and car sharing, etc., into the market and satisfy the supply. And that means that most of the cities have a different kind of supplier mix, right? If I go to from Hamburg to Paris, from Paris to Barcelona, I might always be able to use e-scooters or car sharing, etc., but I would always need to rely on different suppliers and hence also different apps. And I can promise you that just by working a lot with the public transportation providers, they're not making it any easier to kind of streamline the public transportation process either. The second holdup is different entry barriers per market. So besides different mobility setup, so the different players and the different offerings, we also have issues with regards to the fact that some cities are deciding to issue RFPs or tender processes to decide on which e-scooter, for example, to be able to enter the market, as well as with how many vehicles. And some countries offer, for example, incentives for employers to invest into certain employee benefit schemes, while other governments do not do that. There we come to the promised salary and tax considerations. So there are different taxations across countries for both employers and employees, as you know, and a mobility budget only makes sense and adds value if the local salary and tax considerations are understood by the system, by the process, by the hardware, by the software, and it's made easy to process the data over to HR systems for salary and tax considerations. So differentiating between a commuting tour and a private tour, while making sure that the right tax information is shared then in the backend, is something that is very, very crucial to these setups and to these mobility budget solutions. Then there's the topic of investments. There's always money involved if we want to innovate something, right? To develop a new product, to enter a new market, to manage a very operationally heavy hardware market, we need to invest into infrastructure, into car batteries, into loading stations, into a sustainable ecosystem for mobility. And just an example, FreeNow just committed to investing 100 million euros into charging infrastructure, into helping drivers update to electric vehicles. And it's not to show off, it's just to simply say, without investments, no sustainable mobility paradigm shift is going to happen. And then we have the uncertainty due to Corona and due to COVID-19. What do you reckon is the reason that many of employees are actually hesitant to travel for business or for private purposes? Well, based on a poll that we learned from the GBTA, 79% of respondents said safety. Safety is the number one, or has become the number one priority when traveling, irregardless of whether it's for work or for leisure. And pre-Corona in Germany, we had 55% of employees actually availing of a public transport ticket, a monthly public transport ticket. Now the numbers are expected to go way down. It's because of what I shared earlier, right? Why do I need a monthly public transport ticket now if I only go to the office, I don't know, twice a week, or maybe even only 3 times a month? And these changes are also something that we can see in your travel policies, which have been updated, as we heard, by every second company so far. And lastly, we have the governmental support as well as the policies that either make it easy to invest into benefits on the mobility side such as mobility budget, or hinder it. In France, for example, governments provide over 1,000 euros of tax-free support for employers who are investing into the private travel of their employees. So there's a lot of lobbying that needs to be done and needs to be made together with governments to make them understand how important this topic is, to offer a more flexible way of privately traveling as well as commuting, and that we need to incentivize to make investments actually happening in that realm. So these are a couple of holdups, and I'm sure that in the Q&A we'll probably discuss a couple of more. But I want to double check when I got the poll results here, if what we have put together in the presentation is actually something that you in the audience are agreeing with. And lucky me, it actually is. So when asked about the biggest challenges, many of you mentioned the legislation and taxation part. You mentioned the cost. You mentioned that there is no aggregated solution. And one important topic also seems to be a lack of alignment internally. On the main opportunity side, on the right hand, many of you saw the opportunities in the added flexibility for employees. Cool. Increase in employee satisfaction. Check. And optimization of mobility costs and meeting the CSR targets. So it does seem like the current polls in this audience is also being reflected on the slides, but again, happy to chat about it after the session. So what is our take at FreeNow for Business on that topic now? So despite, or maybe even because of all these obstacles and opportunities, we have worked tirelessly during Corona to make the employer subsidized private mobility for employees a win-win-win situation. A win situation for the employee, because now they can spend a certain amount per month on private mobility, which is paid by the employer. For this, they use only one app to find any mode of transportation they're looking for, from a car sharing, ride hailing, e-scooter, or public transport ticket, and that they use to get from A to B wherever they want to be. The second win is for the employer, because they can now actually invest in a product that boosts their employees' morale and gets all the necessary data for payment, expensing, salary, tax, etc., provided on a silver platter in the backend that can be integrated with the HR systems. The third one is for the environment. Sounds a bit cheesy, but I really mean it, because companies can start reducing or at least downsizing their so far inefficient company car programs. And we can make sure that people in cities are not needing to have a private car, but they have, a flexible way of driving around, of getting around at their fingertips via this app. For this, in order to make this a reality, we're obviously working very hard with the governments and the communities, but also with third-party providers. So we're currently getting Voi, Tier, Emmy, Miles, ShareNow, and many more partners onto our platform to make sure that we can offer e-scooters, shared cars, e-mopeds, e-bikes, bus connections, train tickets, etc., all on one platform, and not just in single cities, but really across whole Europe. And that was the fragmented part that I feel a lot of the colleagues here in the audience are or have been waiting for. So this solution for once is scalable, even for internationally operating companies. And I'll close my little monologue here with the last slide, which is just showing you a little bit about our FreeNow's vision of mobility. So it's a couple of screens that show you on the left-hand side how it looks on the back end. So you as an employer can say, Peter is getting 50 euros of mobility budget a year that he can spend on his private and commute purposes. Peter then gets the information, he opens the FreeNow app, and he wants to go from A to B, and he sees, oh, there's an e-scooter around, there's a car sharing around, I can walk to the next bus station. And then it starts raining, and Peter decides, okay, from Reeperbahn to Elbphilharmonie, I am going to take an electric cab. So Peter now gets the cab, he chooses the mobility budget as a payment option. And after the trip, all the information is directly uploaded into the backend software. So this makes it easy for the company to pay and expense for this employer subsidized private travel. And Peter has everything quite easily managed on his app. And after the trip, he can see and log in and check how much budget he has left for the quarter, for example. And we can then obviously showcase what money has been spent on which mobility type. So this is something where I feel we're now a big step forward, whereas middle of last year we're still talking a lot about concepts and these buzzwords. We're now actually having these screens in place. We're getting the app ready, we're getting the supply ready. We need to make sure that we continue talking to governments, communities, and making it easier for us as employers to invest into our employees' well-being and mobility needs. But I do think that is something that is now more than ever a reality and not just a vision anymore. And with that, thanks so much for tuning in. And not sure if David was able to get back into the room yet, but this concludes the little session here. Obviously, very much looking forward to questions, so please use the chat. And I'm pretty sure that David is going to join in a second to moderate the Q&A session now. All right, David is having tech issues. Alice, thanks so much for your kind words. Hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Please use the chat function if you want to know more about the landscape, know more about the solution, have any other questions, comments, concerns, ideas. Let's brainstorm together here. Thanks, Frederick. Last time we had the pleasure of joining the stage together. Good to see you again. And definitely right. This vision is as needed as it is challenging. And that's why I mentioned, in my opinion, that's where the holdup has been coming from, because a lot of puzzle pieces need to come together to make it a reality. And that's why I'm so bullish and happy that we've finally made a good breakthrough on that topic. And we now have David here. Hey, David.
Sorry, Fabio. Yeah, well, that's online events, of course. I was not able to get in again. But anyway, thank you for your presentation. And as you said yourself, it was a monologue, but an interesting monologue, Fabio.
Appreciate it.
Well, I have some questions in the Q&A, which entered during the, let's say, presentation, but also now some in the chat box. But perhaps let's first tackle the one in the chat box. Maria Calvo, which industries do you consider more sensitive to make MOBU a reality in a short term?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Maria. So we are actually talking to a lot of customers across a lot of industries, and we're happy to see that actually many industries are interested in investing into it. And there are even companies, big technology, big consultancy companies who are already giving their employees a mobility allowance. So what happens is that the employer, so the company says, here is 2,000 euros a year, spend it on any mobility that you want to, spend it yourself and let us know afterwards. And during the salary process, we'll reimburse you. It's a big burden for the employer, right? Yes, they're investing into it, but it's creating a lot of friction in the back end when it comes to accounting, etc. So those, in my opinion, are the kind of companies that are going to be first because they're already offering it to the employees. Now they just have suppliers that are making it easier for them to do so. But all the way from huge technology companies down to startups, we will expect a huge influx of demand. Just talked to a friend of mine the other day who's owning a small startup in the pharmaceutical marketing realm. And he was so blown away by this idea of the mobility budget that he said, Fabio, as soon as you have it live, let me know. I want to get all my 20 employees some mobility or provide them with mobility across the month, even for private purposes. So it's really across the industries.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I think another interesting question from Alice Lawrence. How would the app communicate with the different HR systems? Here in Germany, I am sure this would be a huge benefiting kind issue.
Yes, very good. So there are basically two things that we need to consider. The first question is, how do we make sure that we get the right employees with the right amount of mobility budget provided by the company that we're working with over into our systems, right? And this is currently being done with simple SFTP folders, for example. And then the other way, how to make sure that the information which employee has now taken an e-scooters, for how much money and how much budget do they now have left, etc. All this information that is flowing from FreeNow over to the customer. This is done via simple APIs that is tapping into the HR systems and payroll systems. So it's kind of a two-way street. And yes, especially in Germany, and that's why we're happy to kind of launch it here first, because Germany is so freaking difficult to navigate and operate, also with regards to the legal and tax environment. So since we're now equipped in Germany to launch, it's going to be easier for us to also scale across other countries.
All right. Well, thank you, Fabio, for answering these questions. It is now time to close down your session. Thank you for your presentation, for your contribution, for answering the questions of the participants. The people can still, of course, reach out to you through the chat or to one of your team members if they have any questions going forward. And now I'm inviting everybody to join us on the main stage for the executive panel discussion on why your corporate mobility future is bright. I hope you have enjoyed the session and see you later in the conference. Have a nice afternoon.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye, Fabio.
Thanks, David. Bye-bye.